Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments. With my start into the surprisingly complex world of World War II US aircraft colours in my last colour mixing video, and having to deal solely with interior colours, I'll now get into the meat of the subject with a look at exterior paint colours used by the US. Now, as the US wasn't engaged in combat until the attack on Pearl Harbor, unlike Britain and the other Allied powers, America's first engagements were in the Pacific theatre, which is where I'm starting today. See how I'm delaying the subject of olive drab? To be serious, however, we're primarily, though not exclusively, going to be looking at US Navy colours today. Now, before I get into that, however, if you've not seen my prior videos on mixing these colours, I'll be making the same compromises for the mixes I present today as in those other videos. Firstly, I have concentrated on relatively simple mixes to allow you to easily follow these, and so the shades are not always going to be perfect, but I think ease of reproduction is more important than a very small variance in shade. Secondly, these colours are mixed to standards, as meant to be applied factory fresh with no weathering and no scale effect built in. That means that these may well appear too dark or saturated when applied to a model, and of course standards were more often like guidelines in the actualities of war, perhaps even more so, as we will see, for the US than other nations. Third and lastly, I usually use a set of just 12 paints to mix 15 colours, to demonstrate that mixing colours can not only be more accurate than buying pre-made mixes, help develop your skills as a modeller and painter, but also be more economical too. As for accuracy, as I've mentioned many times before, I'm using spectrophotometric values supplied by viewer Casey, along with a number of reference sources, including the excellent Squadron Signal publications and the aid of the paint mixing app that Casey and I have been developing together. If you'd like more information on that latter item, then please do join my live streams, and if you'd like to be included in the beta test of it, then be sure to join the channel through YouTube or Patreon, as members will be getting to beta test this in the near future. At least the near future from the production of this video. I'm going to start with the initial colours used by the Navy leading up to the outbreak of war: light grey and blue grey. This was issued in a specification in 1940, though like many other US directives, it was not really implemented in force until the following year. This called for ship-based aircraft to be painted non-specular, which was simply the Navy nomenclature for matte, light grey overall, with other aircraft painted this colour on undersides and blue-grey on upper surfaces. Non-specular light grey was re-specced with the release of ANA 602, though the difference in the colours is marginal, and given the individuality of US colours, uniform adoption was never going to be quick, especially in a wartime setting. Now, I covered light grey in my interior colours, but I'll present it again here since it was such a common colour and I'm using slightly different paints today, which will give you an alternative mix for it. Blue grey, however, is a trickier subject, and this is one of those colours that has proven very controversial. It had at least 2 formulations and bleached heavily in the sun. I'm going to present 3 possibilities for you today, based on the samples presented in the book Official United States Aircraft Colors 1908 to 1993, US Navy and Marine Corps Aircraft Colors 1940 to 1949, and let you decide which is correct, if any. So let's start with non-specular light grey. For this, we're going to start with a base of 1036 neutral grey, and add 1 volume of 1032 blue grey, and then 1 of 1041 buff. We're then going to lighten this mixture by adding twice the total volume of 1030 Ivory, which brings us to a very nice DE of 0.73. For the later ANA 602 version, we're going to start with 1030 Ivory, and then add 1 volume of 1032 Blue Grey, and 1 of 1053 Leather Brown. This gives us another very respectable DE. For blue grey, we're going to start with the original sample from the National Air and Space Museum DH4. Here we're going to start with 2 volumes of 1002 black and add 3 of intense pink. That might sound odd, but this lightens the black, as does the next edition, 1055 Deck Tan. With these added, we have a purplish grey but when we add the final volume of 1077 dark blue, we preserve the blue and counter the red, giving us a much more neutral blue-grey with a good match of 0.66 DE. For the second iteration, I'm using the Special Navy Standard Aircraft Colour card set from 1933, so this is definitely the early formula of the paint. This is a much lighter and more turquoise blue colour, which we can get by adding one volume each of 1032, 1036, 1053 and 1077, providing a nice match of 0.85 DE. For the third and final iteration of this colour, I'm using Valspar Corporation Archive sample, which is much more similar to the original example I gave you, though a little lighter and more grey. This is the most simple of the mixes, starting with a base of 1002 black, and then adding an equal volume of 1030 ivory, before adding one volume of 1075, providing us with a DE of 0.56. Skipping ahead now to January of 1943, and the issuing of specification SR2C. This introduced the very familiar three-tone pattern for Navy aircraft, though in actual fact this was a four-tone scheme, as we shall see. The directive called for upper airfoil surfaces to be painted semi-gloss sea blue, with upper elements of the fuselage, tail etc. to be painted in non-specular sea blue, which was actually a slightly different shade from the semi-gloss version. Undersides were to be non-specular insignia white, though folding wing surfaces visible from above would be upper semi-gloss blue, which is why aircraft like Corsairs had their outer lower surfaces painted in this way, whereas backwards folding winged aircraft did not. For the vertical areas between the upper and lower colours, either non-specular intermediate blue was to be used, or the two colours blended together to approximate that. No exact directives were given to units on how exactly this should look, meaning that there was a fair bit of interpretation, leading to the differences we see in historical photos, which is also lucky for us modelers who like variance in our subjects. So we'll start these four colours with ANA 601 Non-specular Insignia White, which is a slightly creamy white that we're going to tackle in the same way we did for RAL 9002 in the Wehrmacht video, by mixing 1030 with 1055 to produce a light buff colour, and then add 5 times that volume to lighten it sufficiently to give us a DE match of less than 1. For the upper colour of ANA 606 Semi-Gloss Sea Blue, we're going to lighten 2 volumes of black with 1 of white, and then add 1 volume of 1075 grey blue to it, getting us the dark grey blue with a DE of 0.81. As I mentioned in the US interior colours video, I'm not dealing with surface finishes on any paints, so you will need to add a slight semi-gloss finish on top of this. For the ANA 607 Non-specular Sea Blue, which was actually a slightly darker shade, we're going to keep the 2 volumes of black, again add the 1 volume of 1075, but this time we're going to add another 2 volumes of 1077 dark blue instead of the white. Now bear in mind that although darker than the semi-gloss sea blue, because this is matte it will look lighter at a distance than the semi-gloss paint, but that's something I'll cover in more detail in a future video on scale effect, something I know some of you have asked about before, and it's bound to be controversial with some. Anyway, getting back to the present and our ANA 608 Non-specular Intermediate Blue. Here we're going to start with 2 parts of neutral grey, and make that a little lighter and warmer with 1 part of 1055 Deck Tan. We're then going to mix this with an equal volume of 1075 grey blue, giving us a final 2:1:3 ratio and a DE of 0.9. Now I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who have supported me directly through YouTube memberships and Patreon. This really does keep the channel going, and without you it would be very difficult for me to be able to continue doing this. Now if you're only just seeing your name on here for the first time, it's because I update this monthly, and if I've prepared some videos ahead of time, then there may still have the old list on, even if the list has been updated since then. Don't worry though, your name will get on the list and will continue to appear throughout your support. If you are considering supporting me, YouTube channel membership is by far the easiest way to do this, since Patreon is becoming a more challenging platform to engage with. Whichever you choose, however, I absolutely appreciate your contributions, and don't forget to come and check out the private members Discord, which you get access to at any level. Now before I get into the later war US Navy specifications, I want to quickly address some of the non-Navy aircraft in theatre. As the US entered its island hopping phase of the war, and in order to operate strategic bombers from bases in the Far East, there was a need to camouflage aircraft on the ground. Some of this was, pretty much exclusively for bombers, performed at factories before moving into theatre, but some was done by ground staff, especially on treeless islands with no cover to speak of, where pretty much everything was painted to try to reduce its visibility. The colour primarily used here was Sand 26, and although other colours were used, I'll speak more about them in the next video where I cover more USAAF subjects. Sand 26 was a pinkish colour that tended to fade to an even more pink colour, leading to some imaginative names for some units and aircraft, as you might guess. For us, recreating it isn't too hard. We're simply going to start with 2 parts of 1006 Deep Orange and add 1 part of 1041 Buff to that. We're then going to lighten this with 2 volumes of 1055 Deck Tan, getting us to a very respectable DE of just over 1. Another departure from Navy colours is the subject of haze paint for reconnaissance aircraft. This was a very clever paint with particles smaller than the wavelength of blue light, resulting in high reflection. Unfortunately, it was dogged by issues, including stability, and only about 100 aircraft were ever painted in it. Now, because of this, Lockheed developed what they called synthetic haze paint as an alternative, and standardised on this in 1943 for reconnaissance F-5s. Synthetic haze was a 2-tone scheme of sky base blue, shadow shaded with flight blue. Use of the paint petered out as Lockheed changed their production methods for reconnaissance aircraft from start to finish to modification of standard P-38s, and aircraft were sometimes repainted in theatre colours, PRU blue in Europe for example. Nevertheless, aircraft in synthetic haze operated recon operations in the Pacific Theatre from bases such as Burma. For this scheme, we'll start with Sky Base Blue, which just like Azure Blue requires intense pink to get the correct shade. We're going to take 3 volumes of this, and then add 1 of 1075 Grey Blue and 2 of 1077 Dark Blue. For the light counter shading of Flight Blue, we're going to start with a base of 1 volume of 1077 Dark Blue and add 1 of 1032 Blue Grey. We're then going to neutralise some of that blue with 1 volume of 1036 Neutral Grey before lightening this mixture with 2 of 1001 White to get us the lovely shade of light blue we're looking for. Moving on then to the latest specifications of World War II, ANA 623 Glossy Sea Blue was directed to be the overall colour for all carrier-based aircraft in SR2E, issued in June 1944. This would stand in place for a further 3 years, but in practice many carrier aircraft continued in their 3-colour finish until the end of the war. This specification also contained the other noteworthy change for anti-submarine patrol schemes, which called for ANA 620 Light Gull Grey and ANA 621 Dark Gull Grey, plus Insignia White, which we've already covered. For our purposes, let's start with ANA 623. Which we can achieve with a simple 1-to-1 mix of 1032 Blue Grey and 1074 Grey Blue, with this added to 3 volumes of 1002 Black to give us a DE of 0.72. Of course, you will need to add the glossy coat on top of this, but again, that's outside the scope of this video. For the last 2 colours, we'll start with the lighter colour and a base of 3 parts of 1032. To this we're going to add 2 volumes of 1030, and then, perhaps surprisingly, 1 of 1006 Deep Orange. That gets us to the closest match today with an excellent DE value of just 0.25. For the darker 621, we're going to start with 1 volume of the darker 1075 Grey Blue, and then add 1 volume of 1055 Deck Tan to this, before once again adding another volume of 1006 Deep Orange. This simpler mix still gets us to a DE of under 1, so let's see these on some models. Starting off, we've got the overall early light aircraft grey. whilst on the opposite side we have the 1933 iteration of the grey blue. We can see the difference between that and the other iterations of the grey-blue colour with the next model. And on the opposite side we've combined that with the latest standardised ANA 602. You can see it's very similar, but you can spot the difference when side by side. For our familiar 4-colour scheme, we have this Vought Vengeance with the white, intermediate blue and non-specular sea blue scheme. The wings here are in semi-gloss sea blue with a satin varnish on, and as you can see the difference between these and the fuselage is noticeable if you're looking for it, but on a casual observation at distance it's not very apparent at all. To contrast that, I've gone with the overall glossy sea blue of the later iterations on the other side, paired with ICM's gloss varnish, which has a fairly low sheen, which is more appropriate in this scale. Now let's segue into the sand and synthetic haze colours. I've used a P38 here, and feathered the shadow shading of the two blues into each other using a sponge. On the other side is the Sand 26, creating a rather bizarre looking aircraft with the two side by side. The final scheme is that of maritime aircraft in the theatre, with the gull greys and white. I've done the two main variations of the scheme here, just to give you an idea of the relative contrast between them. So that's our Pacific Theatre US aircraft schemes covered, and for the next colour mixing video I'll get into the schemes used in European and Mediterranean theatres for the US, including the murky subject of US dark olive drab that we touched briefly on in our interior colours video. I'd love to know what you think of these mixes, so please be sure to let me know in the comments section down below. Leaving a comment is free and it really helps me out with the algorithm, even if it's just a very short one. YouTube does seem to be deprioritising any videos with a military link, so liking and commenting on the video really do make a difference in reversing that bias at the moment. Now if you liked what you saw and would like to catch my other videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you know when these videos are uploaded. If you are subscribed but don't see notifications, make sure that bell is set to all, since YouTube often seems to change notifications in its efforts to weed out bot accounts, but it does end up hurting smaller creators like myself in the process. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.